The clink of fine china froze the moment the thick white envelope landed on the mahogany table. Aunt Judy slid it deliberately toward me, her crimson nails tracing the edge, a smirk twisting her lips as she announced to the room that my 8 years of tireless work were over. My position at Titanium Construction, the spine of the empire, was being handed to her 24-year-old daughter, Elmira. According to Judy, my complex payroll system was garbage. Elmira, she claimed, could manage the same work with a simple spreadsheet. I stared across the table at my parents, majority shareholders, and saw nothing. My father stabbed at his prime rib. My mother whispered, pleading for compromise, asking me to step aside for the family. The betrayal weighed heavier than any failure. I unclipped my corporate badge and let it splash into my soup. The plastic hit the broth like a detonator. Without a word, I left the dining room and walked out the front door. The drive back to my apartment was silent. 46 years of life, 8 years of devotion, and a decade of sacrifice flashed through me. I was Sarah. I had kept 12,000 union workers paid, dodged federal penalties, and patched every failure while others celebrated at galas. They treated me like a disposable mechanic, but they forgot. The mechanic knows how to stop the engine from exploding. And now, the engine was about to roar. By Friday, the bomb I had spent years defusing would finally detonate, and nobody would see it coming. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and drafted one final email. No handholding. No transition period. Copying the union representatives, state labor board, and corporate executives, I wrote, effective immediately, I have been terminated without cause. All payroll operations and compliance protocols are now under the sole control of Elmira. One click, and the liability officially shifted to her. I poured a dark glass of Cabernet, letting the quiet of my apartment absorb the chaos I had just unleashed. The following week felt surreal, like watching a slow-motion train wreck from a high-rise balcony. Aunt Judy's calls went unanswered. My parents' frantic texts were ignored. I stayed in the shadows, a ghost observing the storm I'd set in motion. Then came payday. By 10 a.m., the spreadsheet that promised a revolution collapsed spectacularly. Social Security numbers were being processed as hourly rates. Federal taxes calculated as negatives. 12,000 workers stared at empty accounts while projects ground to a halt. Bridges stopped mid-build. Trucks lined highways like monuments to failure. Millions in penalties accrued, and the primary lender issued an immediate default notice. Restore order by 5 p.m., or the company's $15 million operating line would freeze. Panic spread like wildfire. Judy's face drained of color. Elmira's eyes widened in horror. My parents, silent as ever, finally understood the depth of the disaster they had helped create. By late afternoon, Judy thought she could steal the company blind, but I had already set the trap that would snap shut before she even realized it. At 4:15 p.m., I walked into the glass-walled boardroom. Judy sat at the head of the table, pale and sweating, her expensive perfume no longer masking her panic. Elmira sat beside her, frozen, staring at her laptop like it might magically fix the disaster she had caused. Mr. Vance, the general counsel, placed his briefcase on the table with a metallic click, sounding like a gavel, and calmly outlined the corporate violations now under scrutiny. Federal authorities would arrive unless new management assumed immediate responsibility. I slid a single crisp document across the polished mahogany. Sign this irrevocable proxy, and I take voting control of Titanium Construction immediately. My voice was cold, measured, unyielding. Judy's hand trembled as she grasped the pen with both hands. The weight of her own hubris crushed her. With a jagged, desperate signature, she surrendered control. For the first time in 8 years, I sat at the head of the table. Judy retreated to her executive suite, but she had one last desperate card, her hidden banking token, her supposed golden parachute. She thought she could wire $2 million to an offshore account and escape the consequences. I had anticipated this. That very token was tethered to the bank's fraud detection system, and every wire she tried triggered alarms immediately. Within moments, the corporate accounts were frozen, and federal agents were en route. Judy's final heist would end in handcuffs, but Elmira, her innocent-looking accomplice, had no idea her actions would destroy her career. At 3:45 p.m., two federal agents strode through the lobby of Titanium Construction, bypassing reception entirely. Their boots echoed off the marble floor as they pushed open the heavy oak door of Judy's executive suite. She barely had time to register the approaching doom before steel cuffs locked around her wrists. Her designer purse, her last shred of control, sat abandoned on the bathroom counter. Elmira stared at her laptop in disbelief. She had believed her degree and her position made her untouchable, but now she faced the fallout of every fraudulent signature she had stamped. The State Labor Board and the IRS tore her credentials apart. The civil penalty hit hard, stripping her of financial credibility and leaving her permanently blacklisted. No corporation would ever trust her with payroll again. Meanwhile, my parents bombarded my phone, pleading for me to bail Judy out and save the family legacy. I replied once, with a single legal document severing them from my emergency trust fund. I had no obligation to rescue those who had watched me bleed and remained silent while my aunt tried to destroy everything I had built. I walked back to the glass boardroom and sat alone at the head of the table. The protests were over, the accounts secured, and the empire safe. The air felt clean for the first time in years. Months later, the legal gavel would fall, and Judy's fate would be sealed, but the real test was yet to come, confronting the emotional aftermath of a family I had cut off completely. 8 months later, the federal judge's gavel fell. Judy received 8 years in a federal penitentiary, with no parole for the first 5, and $2.4 million in restitution. Elmira avoided jail by cooperating, but was slammed with a $150,000 civil penalty and permanently barred from handling payroll in any corporation. My parents faced the harshest reality: their emergency trust fund gone, the sprawling family estate sold, and a modest 2-bedroom condo replacing a lifetime of comfort. For the first time, they experienced the consequences of silence and cowardice. A thick manila envelope arrived at my desk weeks later. It was a handwritten letter from Judy, filled with excuses, pleas, and tales of family loyalty. I stopped halfway through the first page. The rush of anger never came. Instead, there was only quiet indifference. I fed the pages into the shredder, watching her words turn to confetti, irrelevant as the wind outside. That evening, I drove to my real home. The living room smelled of roasted garlic, laughter spilling from every corner. My college roommate, my first mentor, and the union foreman who had stood by me sat around my table. There was no silver, no wine, but love was tangible. I didn't have to earn a place here. I had finally found a table where respect was given, not demanded. Blood made them my family, but respect made these people my home. Sometimes, cutting the toxic branch is the only way to let the rest of the tree flourish, and in that moment, I finally understood what freedom truly meant.